Hey guys! Tonight, we're setting sail, slowly, quietly, into the not-so-fresh waters of the age of exploration. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, and maybe light a candle if you want to go full 16th century ambience. Because tonight's voyage isn't about glory, or adventure, or discovering new worlds. It's about dirt. Specifically, how long could sailors go without bathing before they essentially became walking ecosystems of their own? And if you're thinking, probably not long, oh, you sweet summer child. These men were basically brined in filth for months at a time, and somehow that was considered fine. So let's drift back, slowly, to an era where hygiene was optional, deodorant was a myth, and everyone kind of just accepted that they smelled like old soup. Now, when we talk about the age of exploration, we're generally floating somewhere between the late 1400s and the 1700s, the time of Columbus, Magellan, Drake, and all those guys who got statues, then had them taken down again. Ships were wooden, slow, and extremely bad at everything except leaking. But they could stay at sea for months, sometimes a year, without docking. Which is great if you're mapping trade routes, but terrible if you're trying to wash your hair. Fresh water was the most precious resource on board. And because of that, it was never wasted on things like bathing. That water was for drinking, cooking, and occasionally throwing at fires when someone's pipe got too ambitious. So, for washing, you had to improvise. The ocean was right there, of course. But here's the thing, seawater doesn't clean you. It leaves you sticky, itchy, and smelling like damp rope. And salt gets everywhere, your clothes, your hair, your soul. So the idea of sailors leaping joyfully into the sea for a refreshing dip? Yeah, that's mostly romantic fiction. If you went overboard in real life, the odds were you wouldn't come back. Not because of sharks, necessarily. Just because nobody was turning the ship around for you. So, for the most part, sailors didn't bathe. At all. For months. They might rinse their hands and face when it rained, or swish some seawater around when things got desperate, but full-on washing was rare. Now, to really appreciate how long they could go without bathing, you have to understand what else they weren't doing. Because bathing wasn't the only neglected part of hygiene. Laundry? Also optional. Toothbrushing? Not really a thing yet. Shaving? Occasionally, if you could be bothered. And going to the bathroom? Well, that's an adventure we'll float past gently, for the sake of sleep. Most ships had a kind of head, which, yes, is where the word comes from. It was literally a plank with a hole near the front of the ship, where the sea spray would do some of the cleaning for you. So imagine standing there, pants down, on a rocking wooden deck, trying not to lose your balance while a wave slaps you in the face. Dignified, it was not. But hey, it's technically a rinse. Maybe we'll count that as partial bathing. So, how long did they go without a real wash? Records suggest that many sailors went entire voyages, several months, without properly bathing. Some expeditions, like Magellan's circumnavigation in the 1520s, lasted 3 years. By the end of it, the few men who survived weren't just hungry and sick, they were fermented. And this wasn't considered strange. In early modern Europe, even on land, people believed that bathing was dangerous. The logic was that hot water opened your pores, and once your pores were open, all sorts of miasmas and diseases could get in. So, naturally, better to stay safely dirty. Soap existed, but it wasn't exactly Lush brand lavender bubbles. It was harsh, lye-based, and left your skin raw. Not great when you're already covered in salt, sweat, and the occasional weevil. Speaking of which, let's drift down into the daily life of a sailor. Just to set the scene for what not bathing really meant. Imagine waking up in a dark, cramped space below deck. You're surrounded by 50 to 100 other men, all breathing, snoring, sweating, and existing. The air is thick, like soup. You roll over, hit your head on a beam, and climb out of your hammock. The wood around you is damp. It's always damp. Salt water seeps in, condensation drips from the ceiling, and your clothes never dry. Your shirt. It's been the same one for 3 weeks. Your socks. Let's not talk about the socks. You might, if you're lucky, rinse them in seawater and let them dry in the rigging, which makes them crunchy, but still unwearably gross. And shoes. If you wore them too often, your feet rotted. Literally. Trench foot wasn't just for World War I, sailors had their own version centuries earlier. So yeah. The smell on board was complex. Think of old wood, spoiled meat, human sweat, gunpowder, and salt, all gently baked under the sun. And nowhere to escape it. You slept in it, ate in it, breathed it. You were it. But here's where it gets strangely fascinating, people just stopped noticing. After a while, your nose gives up. The human brain has this wonderful feature called olfactory fatigue, which means that after smelling something long enough, it just tunes it out. So, after the first week or two, you probably didn't smell anything anymore. You were at peace with your filth. The newcomers? They were the only ones who truly suffered. Officers, of course, had it better. They had small private cabins, sometimes even with a wash basin and a jug of fresh water. But even then, washing usually meant wiping your face with a damp rag. Maybe some perfume or vinegar to mask the smell. The French Navy was particularly fond of vinegar, they used it as a disinfectant, deodorizer, and occasionally, a delusional attempt at freshening up. It didn't work. But at least it smelled fancy. Let's float now to the 18th century, when long voyages were a bit more organized, but hygiene still wasn't. By this time, ships had surgeons on board, not for comfort, mind you, but because disease was practically part of the crew. Scurvy, dysentery, and typhus were routine. And yes, poor hygiene made it all worse. Bathing might have helped, but again, water was rationed, and most people still believed washing could make you sick. So they stuck to the essentials, scraping, shaving, and occasionally dousing themselves in rum if it was a particularly bad week. One sailor wrote in his journal that during a 6-month voyage, he washed only once, with rainwater, and that out of boredom. You have to appreciate the honesty. Now, there were exceptions. In tropical climates, when rainstorms were frequent, sailors sometimes stripped down and let the rain do the work. This was called a rain bath. They'd stand on deck, letting the downpour rinse away a few layers of grime, laughing, shouting, and probably scaring the dolphins. It was the only moment of true freshness they got. Until, of course, the rain stopped and the humidity came back, turning them back into human sponges. The idea of saltwater bathing did come up occasionally. Some captains allowed it, others banned it, because seawater corroded the ship's decks and irritated the skin. And of course, there was always the small risk of being eaten. Sharks were opportunistic. And splashing sailors made excellent snacks. So the general policy was, if you want to stay clean, stay alive, pick one. As for smell management, well, there were a few creative methods. Some sailors rubbed their hands with lemon peels or vinegar-soaked cloths. Others carried herbs or spices in little pouches around their necks. Perfume was for officers and gentlemen, not the average tar-covered deckhand. And even if you had perfume, it wouldn't do much good. Covering ship's stench with floral water is like spraying Febreze on a corpse. So yes, if you're wondering how long they could go without bathing, the answer is simple: months. Sometimes, a year or more. And the amazing part? Most of them survived it. Not comfortably, mind you, but they survived. Because when you live in filth long enough, your body and your expectations both adapt. You stop worrying about how you smell, and start focusing on more immediate problems, like not dying of scurvy, or keeping your hammock from being eaten by rats. So, next time you feel bad about skipping a shower, remember, you're basically cleaner than 99% of the world's explorers. Magellan, Drake, Columbus, they all went months without bathing, brushing, or changing their underwear. And yet, they still managed to cross oceans, claim continents, and draw maps that mostly made sense. We'll float a little deeper into that world next, into their food, their clothes, and the surprisingly philosophical art of not caring how you smell. But for now, just imagine the gentle creak of the ship, the waves against the hull, and the soft, collective sigh of 100 unwashed men drifting slowly toward the horizon. It's oddly peaceful, isn't it? Hey again. If you're still with me, congratulations. You've made it through several months of imaginary grime and at least 3 layers of shipboard odor. Tonight, let's keep sailing slowly along that same rank breeze, into what it actually felt like to live day to day on an exploration vessel. Because if you think not bathing sounds bad, wait until you hear about what they ate, where they slept, and how they maintained themselves between ports. Don't worry, nothing too intense. Just a steady lull of mild disgust, softened by the gentle rhythm of the waves. So, let's step, very carefully, into the daily routine of a sailor in, say, the 16th or 17th century. Morning came early, usually with a shout from the watch or the sound of someone dropping a barrel. The light down below was dim, dusty, and permanently filtered through a haze of smoke and damp fabric. Most men slept in hammocks, which were a surprisingly practical invention. They were hung close together, maybe a foot or 2 apart, so imagine a long, swaying row of unwashed cocoons, gently rocking in sync. If you're trying to fall asleep tonight, you can picture that, a creaking hull, the slow sway, and the muffled breathing of 100 sailors dreaming about dirt-free land. Hammocks had one big advantage: they didn't get as soaked as sleeping on the floor. But everything else about them was miserable. There was no privacy. No personal space. No air movement. And the constant dampness meant you were basically slow cooking in your own humidity. Changing your clothes? Not common. Most sailors owned exactly 2 sets of clothing. One for daily use. One for clean days, which were extremely theoretical. Laundry happened when there was time, weather, and water, which meant, almost never. If you did wash your clothes, you'd dunk them in seawater, stomp on them a bit, and hang them over the rigging to dry. They'd dry stiff and salty, like cardboard. But hey, they were technically clean. Let's talk about food, which, somehow, made the smell worse. Rations were monotonous, heavy, and very brown. The staples were salted meat, hardtack, and dried peas. That's it. 4 months. Hardtack was basically a brick made of flour and water, baked until it could break your teeth. Sailors softened it by soaking it in water, ale, or soup, if they had any. If they didn't, they just chewed and hoped for the best. The meat, usually beef or pork, was salted within an inch of its life. Sometimes it was so hard they had to smash it with a hammer first. And the salt content was so extreme that sailors often joked it was meat-flavored salt. Vegetables? Rare. Fruit? Only at the start of a voyage, before it rotted. After that, it was mostly preserved stuff, which, by the 16th century definition, meant barely edible. And of course, rats loved all of it. They got fat on stolen rations, which led to the unfortunate side effect that sometimes, sailors ate them. Cooked rat wasn't common, but it wasn't exactly scandalous either. If you're hungry enough, everything's protein. The smell below deck was a perfect blend of salt meat, mold, sweat, smoke, and rodent optimism. Delicious. As for drinking water, well, it didn't stay fresh for long. Barrels of water were stored for months, and after a few weeks they turned into what sailors politely called green water. That meant algae, slime, and an occasional floating bug. But water was water. So they drank beer, wine, or rum instead, weak versions, but still safer than water. In the 18th century, the British Navy became famous for its daily rum ration. About half a pint a day, per man. It was eventually diluted with water and lime juice, creating the famous grog, which, ironically, probably saved more lives than bathing ever did. The vitamin C in the lime helped prevent scurvy. And if you drank enough of it, you stopped caring about the smell anyway. Now, as filthy as sailors were, they still had a few rituals of cleanliness, or at least, maintenance. They'd scrape their skin with knives or bits of rope to remove grime, dead skin, and the occasional barnacle. They called this dry washing. Because sure, when you can't get wet, just exfoliate with cutlery. They also oiled their hair and beards to keep lice somewhat under control. And when lice inevitably won, they'd shave their heads entirely. It wasn't fashion, it was self-defense. For clothes infested with vermin, they had two options. Hold them over a fire and hope you didn't burn them, or throw them overboard and start again from scratch. The smell of burning lice and wool was a normal background note on deck. A kind of salty incense of despair. Now, you might be wondering how this lack of hygiene affected health. The answer, catastrophically, but predictably. Skin infections were constant. Rashes, ulcers, boils, sailors got them all. Fungal infections were practically part of the uniform. And with that much salt, sweat, and humidity, every small cut was a potential death sentence. There was also scurvy, the great destroyer of teeth and dignity. It came from a lack of vitamin C, and after a few months at sea, the symptoms were brutal. Swollen gums, loose teeth, open sores, and general misery. And yet, even with all that, captains still rationed fruit like it was gold. By the 18th century, British naval surgeon James Lind finally figured it out: citrus fruit cured scurvy. But it took decades before the Navy made it standard practice. So for centuries, sailors just fell apart. Slowly. Quietly. Smelly. And let's not forget sleep, which was rarely peaceful. Hammocks swayed all night, the ship creaked, waves slammed, and rats scurried overhead. Add a few men coughing, snoring, or muttering, and you've got a lullaby fit for nightmares. But oddly enough, many sailors reported sleeping deeply. Exhaustion will do that. Their bodies got used to the movement. Some even said they couldn't sleep properly on land afterward. Too still. Too quiet. Too clean. Now, about that personal space thing. There wasn't any. You lived elbow to elbow, ate from the same dishes, and probably shared your lice with your best friend. Officers had cabins, yes, but even those were barely big enough to turn around in. Privacy was a luxury reserved for land. Social hierarchy was strict, though. Sailors had to be deferential to officers, even when everyone smelled equally bad. The captain, of course, often smelled the least bad, not because he bathed more, but because he had access to things like vinegar, scented oils, and occasionally, laundry privileges. Vinegar was the Febreze of the sea. If it smelled acidic, it must be clean, right? You might think that all this filth led to total chaos, but surprisingly, ships were fairly orderly. Every day had a routine. Morning, clean the deck, with seawater, naturally. Noon, eat your ration, drink your grog. Afternoon, work, fix sails, or scrub something that will be dirty again in 5 minutes. Evening, maybe sing, maybe gamble, maybe complain about the meat. Cleaning the deck with seawater was the one hygienic practice everyone agreed on. Not because it killed germs, but because it kept the wood from drying and cracking. So yes, the ship got washed more often than the men. Now, let's drift over to the officers' version of cleanliness, which was basically aristocratic denial. They might have small tubs in their cabins for bathing, which meant sponging off with a cloth and a few cups of water. Soap was rare, perfume was precious, and silk handkerchiefs did most of the work. An officer might even change his shirt daily, a luxury that made him both envied and quietly hated. Their cabins often had windows, called stern lights, which let in a sliver of fresh air. The difference in smell between the officers' quarters and the lower deck was probably the most dramatic transition outside of heaven and hell. But even the officers couldn't escape completely. The same air circulated everywhere. The same rats visited everyone. And after a few months, everyone smelled like ship. It's worth remembering that to these men, filth wasn't failure. It was just life. Most people on land didn't bathe much either. A peasant might wash a few times a year. A noble might take a sponge bath once a week. So going months without a bath didn't seem shocking, it was just an extreme version of normal. What makes the age of exploration unique is that they chose this life. They volunteered to spend months in a damp wooden box, eating salt, sleeping on ropes, and never once seeing a bar of soap. All in the name of discovery, trade, or occasionally, being press-ganged by accident. So maybe there's a strange piece in that. They weren't trying to be clean. They were trying to survive. And survival, on a ship like that, was an achievement. Every now and then, though, nature gave them a gift, rain. When a proper downpour hit, everyone ran on deck, stripped off, and turned it into a mass shower. They'd scrub with sand or rope, rinse off, and feel, briefly, like new men. Then they'd laugh, shiver, and go right back below deck to stew in it again. That moment, that fleeting feeling of being clean, was probably the closest they got to happiness on board. And it didn't cost a drop of fresh water. So, when we ask, how long could sailors go without bathing, the honest answer is, as long as they had to. Months. Maybe a year. Sometimes more. And they were fine with that. Or at least, they convinced themselves they were. As the 18th century rolled into the 19th, ships got bigger, voyages shorter, and hygiene slowly improved. By the Victorian era, officers started encouraging cleanliness as a form of discipline. The Royal Navy even issued soap. Progress, at last. But in the golden age of exploration, the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, bathing was a myth, and dirt was destiny. So next time you step out of the shower, all fresh and perfumed, maybe take a second to appreciate that you're not currently marinating in your own brine, eating salted pork in the dark, and scraping your skin with a knife just to feel fresh. You've already achieved more hygiene than Magellan ever did. And on that gently depressing note, let's drift onward, to the next question nobody asked but everyone secretly wonders. How did anyone date or fall in love in an era when everyone smelled like a fish barrel? Hey again, sailor. If you're still here, you've officially gone longer without a bath than most people on Netflix. But don't worry, tonight's leg of the journey is softer. We're not scrubbing decks or scraping lice anymore. We're drifting into something a little more delicate. Something human. Because even in the age of exploration, an era of endless grime, scurvy, and questionable meat, people still manage to think about love. Not often, and not particularly romantically, but enough to make it worth talking about. So, dim the lantern, settle in your hammock, and let's quietly explore how sailors handled the one thing they couldn't pack in a barrel, affection. Let's start with a simple truth: sailors were chronically lonely. Voyages could last for months, sometimes years, and contact with the outside world was rare to non-existent. There were no phones, no letters in transit, no seagull-based messaging service, nothing. Once you left port, you were gone.